Melissa James is the Vice Chairman of Global Capital Markets at Morgan Stanley, where she currently co-leads the ESG Center for Excellence. Melissa has worked with numerous clients on strategy formulation and implementation around environmental, social, and governance matters. Melissa, it's great to see you. If you notice a jacket change, it's called coffee stains. But great to see you. Let me just start and open up with a very blunt question, because I know how seriously you take this subject. If you go into one of your client companies and you're sitting there, we're talking about ESG metrics and how to get it right and how to make it, they may have good intentions, but, you're saying, look, and you just say, you folks aren't real unless you do X. How do you move from the well-intentioned to the real in this space when it comes to financial markets and the investment community?
Well, I think the key to ESG, just like any other strategy, is that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Every company really needs to understand what the ESG issues are that are specific to not only their sector, but to their company. What are the issues that matter from a materiality perspective? So we often advise clients to start with a materiality assessment and to identify those risks that can have a meaningful impact on their business, because the investment community is really looking for that intersection between risks and opportunity. And that means they want to understand what is meaningful from a financial perspective to the bottom line, either in terms of things that can either accelerate potentially a company's growth or alternatively limit their downside. So it's very company and sector specific.
When you walk in, how is the literacy of your client base in this area? Is it something where people are tooling up and they've got an open aperture, or is there pretty good literacy about it now, given the scale, the really rapidly rising, big increasing scale of investment dollars in this area? How much do you have to be teacher?
So what we tell people, generally speaking, is that ESG is a journey. It's not a destination. And every company is at a different stage, basically, in their journey. But as a general matter, I would say that 2020 was really an inflection year for ESG. And as a result, ESG is now a mainstream topic. And it's making its way into a variety of different corporate financial decision making. And this is the result of a recognition on the part of market participants broadly speaking, that ESG strategies really outperformed traditional strategies by about 4% in equities last year. And if you couple that with the fact that over a longer time horizon, ESG strategies have been proven to produce lower downside risk by about 20% over like a 15-year time horizon, that better risk-adjusted return profile is one of the things that's been fueling a lot of the growth in ESG AUM. And it's that growth in ESG AUM that's now got a variety of different market participants focused on this. So I would say it's much more understood. People are, generally embracing it and recognizing that this is something that they have to be on top of. They have to understand what the impact and significance is for their business, because it can have a meaningful impact on the bottom line.
Melissa, how important are very clear data points and disclosures to a smarter ESG strategy across these different platforms?
So it's clear that, you get what you measure, right? I mean, that's one of the fundamental premises behind business. And so, yes, you absolutely need to have a robust strategy. You need data and disclosure around those material risks and issues. And so that's, again, why we tell companies to do a materiality assessment, figure out what data and disclosure is necessary to basically communicate to the market, and make sure that you are establishing goals and metrics and that you are monitoring your progress relative to those goals. One of the main ESG issues out there, as we all know, is climate change. And so really understanding what a company's contribution is to the creation of global greenhouse gas emissions, how they're actually measuring those throughout their value chain, not just those emissions that are specific to their own operations, but also their downstream activities, and making sure that they are doing their best to abate those emissions to whatever extent they can, and working towards helping achieve this goal of net zero by 2050. And so data matters quite a lot, and measurement, and assessing progress relative to those goals is critically essential to performing from an ESG perspective.
Melissa, is there something that the policy community should be doing in terms of helping the terrain take hold better, or are there things that they can do to disrupt this that you would warn the policy community against?
Well, I think, one of the things, again, back to this point about data matters. Clearly data and disclosure in the ESG world is evolving, and there needs to be more standardization ultimately of data and disclosure. But that will happen with time. It will be evolutionary, not revolutionary. It's a question of when, not if. And so we generally support voluntary disclosure frameworks like the TCFD. Morgan Stanley was one of the first U.S. banks to support the TCFD as an example. We also sit on something called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials, which is a steering committee of financial institutions that are focused basically on coming up with a carbon accounting methodology for the industry. And so, there are a lot of efforts afoot to ensure that we have more consistent data and disclosure. And we think that those are important. There are organizations like the IFRS that are out there trying to harmonize a variety of ESG acronyms to make sure that the various frameworks that are out there, whether they be the GRI or the SASB framework or, the CDP framework, that those actually come together. And there's even talk about the IFRS putting forth a proposal in the fall during the COP26 to have a global sustainability standards council. So I think data standardization and disclosure is something that we're moving towards, and that's something that we think is necessary to continue to evolve in this space.
Melissa, just a final question. I know you've got so many clients in place in this. I know you've laid out frameworks that are, trying to go to your clients where they are. But as you step back and look at it, and you've been at this for a long time, and I've enjoyed our conversations even before today, do you get a sense that this is now getting momentum and that the footprint of ESG in the financial sector is unstoppable at this moment, that the trends are going to yield real impacts on climate, real impacts on sustainability, real impacts on these other issues? I mean, I just love to know your gut feeling.
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I do think that, again, back to this point that we're at an inflection point, I think that there has been a real intersection between, the value of doing good for good's sake and the value of doing good to do well, basically, to create financial performance. We've looked at the correlation, for example, between good ESG stewardship and a variety of different financial metrics. And one thing where we found a very strong correlation is looking at betas, basically. Companies that generally perform better from an ESG perspective as measured by things like their MSCI rating tend to have lower betas. And when you look at that relationship, companies with lower betas, that translates into a lower cost of equity. And that lower cost of equity has a very meaningful implication for how companies think about capital allocation decisions, as an example. The same is true for companies' cost of debt. You see now with the explosion in the ESG labeled bond markets that investors are willing to reward companies for strong ESG stewardship. And so companies can borrow more cheaply by incorporating sustainability features into their debt instruments, and as a consequence are taking advantage of this. So this lower cost of debt coupled with the lower cost of equity combines to create a lower cost of capital. And again, that has implications for capital allocation decisions, things like M&A and what companies invest in, not just in terms of their capital expenditures organically, but also inorganic growth, what they look to invest in from an M&A perspective. So we're absolutely seeing ESG start to impact a whole host of M&A decisions. I could give you any number of examples of M&A transactions that we've worked on that have been precipitated in part by, considerations around what the environmental and social impact, frankly, is going to be on the pro forma company. So I do think that this has become something that is here to stay and is, going to really affect how companies make decisions going forward.
This is such a cool discussion, and you know so much about the topic. I want to invite you to be my co-host next time when we do an ESG summit. Melissa James, Vice Chairman of Global Capital Markets, co-head of the ESG Center for Excellence at Morgan Stanley. Such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.